Nostalgia is a fickle thing. As children, we're naive, and we tend to like things that as adults we realize aren't actually that good. For instance, I loved Sonic Underground growing up. However, I realize now that it is an unmitigated dumpster fire. The same can be said for The Sims, a game that I was obsessed with as a kid, but it hasn't aged well, and even though it set a great standard for other games to come, it can get pretty boring pretty quick. And wouldn't you know, books can fall into this category too, such as Does Third Grade Last Forever? Does Third Grade Last Forever was published by Mindy Shanback. Shanback? Shanback? We're going to say Shanback. Her other notable works are What's New in Sixth Grade and Princess from Another Planet. I read this book as a kid, and I came across it while scavenging for my Redwall novels in a giant tub of books in the living room. I'll find you one day, Sable Queen. One day. It was a quick read for me. Took me less than an hour. But wow, this wasn't nearly as good as I remember. The best part of this novel is the main lead, Tracy. She's a very snarky 8-year-old. She can be a smartass, and she's pretty funny, especially with some of the things that she says in response to certain situations. She reminds me a lot of Junie B. Jones if she was a little older and a little wittier. I also like the ideas behind marriage and step-parents. The idea that just because you have a step-parent doesn't mean you still can't love your real parents. That is where my compliments end, however, because the rest of this thing is something else. Let me get this out of the way. I hate Tracy and Ronald's parents. So Susan, Tracy's mother, tells her while grocery shopping one day that she's getting remarried. Just out of the blue. 2 weeks later, she marries some guy named Walter and moves Tracy halfway across the country. Why do I hate this? Well, Tracy's mom never bothered to introduce Tracy to Walter beforehand. You have a young daughter here. She has a young daughter whose parents are divorced, and Tracy is fiercely loyal to her father. And what does Susan do? Well, she just pops up and says, "Surprise, I'm getting married," and then proceeds to uproot her daughter's entire life just so she can rush into a marriage without thinking about how it's going to affect her child. Okay. Need to calm down a little bit. This is a bit of a sore point for me. Walter, Susan's new husband, is in the same boat. Neither of them take the time to sit their kids down and talk to them. Neither of them even bother to introduce them to each other before the wedding. They just throw them together in the same home and then act surprised when Ronald and Tracy don't get along. The book tries to hint that later on the reason Susan and Walter start fighting a lot is because their kids aren't getting along, and it's the kids' fault their parents are having issues. But no, it's the parents' fault. They rushed into a marriage without caring an inch about how their children feel. On top of that, Susan's mother-in-law is very domineering and treats Susan horribly, and Walter never bothers to stand up for his wife. Honestly, if there was a sequel to this book and it starts with Tracy telling us how Susan and Walter lasted less than a year, I wouldn't be surprised. Within a few months of being married, they have a bunch of fights, and then at one point Walter leaves with Ronald because he doesn't want to be around Susan, and Susan responds by sitting around and crying like the immature little taint that she is. Parents of the world, okay? I understand you want to find love and be happy and shit, but your kids should always come first. Don't just smash two families together and expect them to get along. And also, Mindy Shanback, I'm not sure if you meant to do this, but you basically wrote a book about how it's the children's fault their witless parents are fighting. Good job. Aside from that, everything else in this book feels very undercooked. Ronald and Tracy don't get along, Tracy pulls some pranks on him, and then suddenly, at the end, he defends her against a bully and they start liking each other. And there's no build-up to it, Ronald just suddenly likes her. There's some friend drama at Tracy's school, but it doesn't affect the story in any way. And the whole premise of accepting step-parents and accepting change when it comes to marriage and step-parents, while a decent premise for a children's book, is squandered because Tracy not liking Walter is an understandable reaction after her mother basically flipped life on its head and told Tracy to deal with it. Anyway, I'm gonna give Does Third Grade Last Forever a D.